What's up, everybody? Christian from Treasure Town here, and today we're going to be going over the complete history of the nickel in the United States. So basically there's a ton of rich history in terms of how the nickel was created, what it was looking like in the early stages, and then kind of we'll track the journey throughout the different designs to becoming what it is today. And along the way we'll talk about the specific information that correlates with each of the designs, and then we'll also be talking about values and any other cool things like errors, key dates, those sorts of things. So I made a presentation, let's dive right into it. Alright, so before we get into the presentation in terms of talking about the actual coins, I just want to say a little bit about the nickels on the whole. They were created in 1866, the specific design, I guess, after the Civil War, and they got their name because one of the primary components used to strike the coin was nickel. It was a mix of mostly copper and a little bit of nickel. The thing, though, that was interesting is that the name was there to differentiate it because there was an half dime also circulating at the same time that was a lot smaller, but it contained silver in it, which was a more valuable metal. And one of the things is that this, throughout the history of the nickel, would be a much tougher metal to strike. It was harder than most of the other metals, so it created a lot of the problems for people who were making the coins. So the die life would be shortened because when it would strike coins, the dies, which are used to strike the coins, they would wear out a lot faster than when they were striking coins with softer metals. And one thing is that the coiners would specifically resist making certain coins as early as 1867. They were able to overcame their fear, and the nickels would be commonplace, and they still are today, while a half dime would be phased out shortly thereafter. So one thing before I start this as well is that the values, very circulated is like a good 4 grade, lightly circulated is XF40, and uncirculated is going to be a mint state 65. So this shield nickel with rays, the specific composition was 25% nickel, 75% copper, and they were put along in circulation along with those half dimes. And originally they had the thing that differentiates this from the regular shield nickel is that there were these rays throughout the back of the coin, but those were just removed quickly because they would shorten the die life due to the complications, as it was just tougher to put the metal into the recesses in the dies. The errors to look for, there's a lot of errors on this shield nickel series, and this continues into the no rays as well. But there's a very repunched date in 1866, and then there's a really rare 1867 with rays proof coin, which ranges in value from about $30,000 to $80,000. In terms of the value of this coin, very circulated ones go for about $30, light circulation is $100, and uncirculated ones are about $1,000. So nothing too crazy on the values, but there's still some good value associated with it. Moving on, they would strike shield nickels until 1883 without the rays, so 1867 to 1883, and these coins did not alleviate the problems, but they lessened them somewhat in terms of without having the rays, and the striking problems did persist, and they would lead to a lot of inconsistent strikes and die cracks across the series. And there are some notable errors, including the 1879 over 8, 1883 over 2, and then 1873 has open and closed threes in the date, which is found right here under this big shield. In terms of the rarities, there's proof only 1877 and 1878, and then the 1880 coin is just a really rare one. Its value ranges from about $1,000 to $90,000, very, very low mintage. In terms of the value on regular ones, the circulated ones are $10, light circulation $50, and uncirculated is about $400. So there's value again, but they're really attainable if you just want to buy a pretty circulated example somewhere. The next change on the design would come in 1883 when they shifted to this example shown here, which is the Liberty Head or V nickel. And the interesting thing about this one, though, is that there was no cents on the coin. So that led to a big problem because with the V, people would just plate the coins with gold or what looked like gold and then pass them as $5 coins. They were called racketeer nickels. And true racketeer nickels, unlike there's a lot of fake racketeer nickels, which is kind of funny, it's like fake fakes, but they would read the edges as well all around the coin so it would look like it was a real gold $5 coin. And people caught on to this pretty quickly, so they changed the design, shifted it around, and would transition to one that says cents on it. The values on this for just a regular one, very circulated $10, light circulation $13, and uncirculated $200. The reason that it's a little more attainable is because people realized what was happening and were more likely to save the coins as it was a first year of issue, so there wasn't too much rarity there. The 1883 to 1913 Liberty Head nickel, or V nickel, this one comes with a little bit more nuance, but they would shift the e pluribus unum, on top of the V and then have cents right there, and people were unable to plate these, obviously, because it says cents. There are a lot of small cherry picker varieties, but the money here lies in just rare dates. Key dates include the 1885, which is 350 to 1,000 to 5,000 on my scale, and 1886, which is 180 to 500 to 3,000. Then there's also the 1912S, which comes in a little bit lower than those prices, but those are the dates to look for there. And 1912 was the first and the only year that they would be having mint marks. Coins were made in Denver with a D mint mark and San Francisco with the S mint mark, and that was going to be found underneath this dot here on the coin. In terms of the value, they're range from $1 for very circulated, so very little value there. But the lightly circulated, better looking ones cost about $30, and then uncirculated, you can expect $300. That design would only stick around for 30 years before they went to the Buffalo nickel, where they again had a problem with the 5 cents on the back of the coin. Though they remembered to include it, what happened here was that the raised ground would make it so the coins would wear off really quickly, and they wanted to change that. So they made these coins, they made them at all of the mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. And obviously the D and the S are going to be more expensive than the values that I showed here. But the obverse was styled after 3 Native Americans, kind of conglomerated and mixed together, combined to get what we have there. And on the back, it was a bison, so it was not a buffalo, but it was a bison that was used to sculpt the design there. And they had the values $12 for really circulated, $25 for a little bit, and $100. These are for the Philadelphia raised ground 1913 Buffalo nickel. And later that year, again, they switched over to this, where they had in recess 5 cents, and then if they had a mint mark, it would be right there underneath that. And there were no mint marks on the shield nickels, I should make that clear, but the very circulated ones, again, are like 50 cents to $1. Light circulation, maybe $3, but probably a little lower. Then uncirculated is about $65. And there were a lot of weak strikes on these, so in the 1920s, especially at Denver and San Francisco, and really a lot on the 1926D, there was just low quality control. They wouldn't strike them that well. So people look for full horn, and they also look for just really sharply struck pieces. Then they can fetch exorbitant amount of money compared to what you might think they would be worth if they're from those dates. And some of the better error coins include a 1914 over 3 overdate, 1916 and 1935 double dies, and then 1936 and 1937D coins with less than 4 legs. 36, there's a 3.5 legs one, and 37D, there's a 3 legs, where it looks like one of the buffalo's legs just is not there. So that's kind of something interesting about this series. There also were the special strike 1927 coins that are about $50,000. So that's something that you might want to read up on and learn a little bit more about. But again, as I said, average buffalo nickel is not super valuable, so it's not like a crazy discovery if you have one of these. Next up, we have the design that would stay for a really, really long time, one of the longest in American coinage. That is the Jefferson nickel from 1938 to 2003. And these coins are not specifically valuable either. They're what we use today. Obviously, there are specific ones that are quite rare, but they switched these midway through 1938, and they had Jefferson and his building Monticello come onto the coins. And these coins, I really like them personally, the design, but from 1938 to 1964, they would have the mint mark featured right here, unless it was a war nickel, which we'll get into next. And after 1968, they reappeared on the front. As you can see, there's an S, there's a proof coin, but They would reappear on the front. And the main expensive coins are the full step errors. So that's something a little bit different. It's not like there's a ton of errors or big key dates. They would just be if all of those steps were struck in full, especially on coins from the 50s, maybe 40s, and some in the early 60s. Those would be really, really valuable, as most of the time the steps were not clearly delineated from one another. In terms of the semi-key, it's 1950D. There's just a lower mintage there, but they're like $10 coins. It's not anything wild. And then some of the really good coins is the 1942 Frith nickel, which is where there was a problem that I'll explain in a moment, and then also the 1971 no S proof in a proof set where they had the proof strike as opposed to a regular strike, and they left off the S here. In terms of what I was talking about with the war nickels, in 1942, for the war effort, they really needed the nickel. So they transitioned to an alloy with 35% silver, 9% manganese, and 56% copper. And what they did to denote them from the regular alloy was that they put a really large mint mark above Monticello instead of on the side to show that it was silver. So they would have P, D, and S. It was the first time the Philadelphia Mint actually had their mint mark appear on any coins, and there were a good mix of errors that I talk about in a different video. I'm not going to get into all of them, but the Frith nickel basically was this 1942, and all S Mint coins from this year should have the S above the Monticello and all be silver, but there was a 1942 obverse with a S Mint on the side, and that was just a super rare coin because the S Mint on the side was a 1941 reverse, so somehow they ended up on the same coin. Coin is extremely valuable. In terms of the value, it's mostly tied to the silver. There's not really a difference how circulated it gets, but they're about like $1.50, probably more like $1.25 in any circulated condition, and then Unk would bring you up to about $15. Lastly, there's just two nickels I'm going to go over. There's not too much to be said about them, but for the 200th anniversary of the Lewis and Clark expedition, which occurred under Thomas Jefferson's presidency, they decided that that was the occasion to make commemorative nickels with Jefferson on the front and these different designs on the back, whether it was like a keel boat or this Indian peace medal, bison, or the Pacific Ocean view. And there weren't any major errors. There was a little bit. I've gone over them in other videos. They're not really crazy errors, but outside of those errors, there's really nothing too valuable about these coins. They're just kind of neat. And then if you fast forward 2006 to present, there were this new design for the nickel. It had Jefferson facing forward. It hasn't been met with a great reception. Maybe that's because they're striking the coins differently, so there's not as much of the relief, which comes up really strong, especially on some of those older Jefferson nickels from 1938 maybe to 1960 or 1964, but the back was left untouched, very similar to what it was before. So that's the overview of the nickel. Hope you learned a lot. Hope you kind of got some cool information. I definitely learned a lot in terms of how the nickel was so hard and challenging to strike, and there's just a wealth of information out there on these coins, and I hope that you feel like you've got a good grounding. Thanks for watching the video. I'd encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe even check out the merchandise below. I'd also, if you want to get in touch with me, go to my website, treasuretownYT.com, my Instagram, TreasureTownYT, my Facebook, TreasureTown, my Twitter, TreasureTownYT. All of those links are going to be in the description. And with that, I'll see you on my future videos.